who's joined us. It's always such a great event, the Learning and Teaching Conference. We all look forward to it. Particularly we can gather in the virtual Butte Hall and talk to each other at the tables. So I really hope that we can set you up for a really good day of small group and large group and informal interactions, and to really inspire you for what you're going to be thinking about and planning into your teaching and your partnership with students. I'd really like to give a particular welcome to all of our external visitors and guests today. I know we have around 80 people joining us from some of our European networks, such as the Guild. So it's really great that you're here, and I really hope you enjoy the event today. I'm just going to set this up for the talk. What we want to do today is really just share some thoughts with you about inclusivity and what that means. And hold on a second, I can't multitask. I'm just going to concentrate on making sure that I share my my slide and not the wrong thing. There we go. Hopefully that's working for you all. We want to share some thoughts about inclusivity in learning and teaching and assessment, which is what the conference obviously is focused on. I think what I'd really like to do, and I'm sure I speak for Mia when I say this, is to think about what inclusivity really means for us, not just collectively, but individually as well. I'm very proud that the University of Glasgow has signed up to the value of inclusivity. The values is it's core to our university strategy and core to our learning and teaching strategy. But I think doing that raises lots of questions for us about what that really means in our practices. And I think what we'll probably each be doing today is raising lots of rhetorical questions for us to reflect on as we go throughout the day, and as we think about our practice and our approach to learning and teaching in the future. So with that in mind, let me just begin, particularly for the benefit of those of you who are visiting us today, with reading out the statement that we have as our educational purpose from the university's learning and teaching strategy, the link to which is provided at the bottom of the slide. So we've said that our core educational purpose is to develop and support our students through an excellent university experience, so that they can fulfill their academic potential and contribute in the fullest way possible to culture, to society, and to the economy, locally and globally throughout their lives. What we're really seeking to do, and obviously highlighted here for emphasis, is to create an inclusive environment where students develop meaningful relationships with one another and with staff, and through those encounters create new knowledge, challenge received wisdom, build intercultural and leadership capabilities, and develop disciplinary excellence and an appetite for lifelong learning and inquiry. And I wouldn't
Moira,
usually, yeah.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Your slides haven't moved on. The screen share is just sitting in editing mode.
Oh.
Could you reshare your slides now that you've started it in PowerPoint? I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I didn't want you to get too far into your talk without realising.
No, you're quite right. You're quite right. Because you can't tell when you're presenting it. It's absolutely fine, Caitlin. Right. When I move them on?
Yes, that's perfect. That's it. Perfect.
So that's working now?
Yes, that's it.
No, I'm glad you interrupted me. Thank you. That's fine. Not a problem. So yeah, I wouldn't usually read a slide out word for word, but I think it's important that we start just to really absorb what it is that what we're meaning here when we're talking about inclusive education and the purpose that we've agreed as an organisation. Just to think about what that might mean from some other perspectives. Some of you may be familiar with this UNESCO, it's not so much a definition but description. So UNESCO take the view that promoting inclusive education systems means removing the barriers that limit participation and that limit the achievement of all learners. So it's about respecting diverse learner needs and the abilities and characteristics of learners, and eliminating forms of discrimination in the learning environment. Now, one of the obvious ones of those are digital poverty, and there's a picture of my dog just because she's cute and I like to include her in presentations. But in all seriousness, these barriers can exist across a whole range of visible and often invisible aspects of our physical and digital and environment. And as we'll go on to consider our culture and our behaviours and our attitudes and just how we speak about the work that we do and the environment that we try to inculcate at the university. So this is about actively recognising and removing the barriers, and I think it's the first indication of really thinking that, you know, we don't all see barriers unless we encounter them in our own experiences. We don't tend to see them, so we really have to listen to people who experience those barriers in their working lives and in their study and in their education and in even accessing education in the first instance. So seeing those barriers, recognising them and doing something about them is a huge part to begin with. Looking at some other aspects of this, Advance HE in one of their online case studies, which is linked to their talk about an intercultural curriculum as being one which creates a space in which learners and teachers cohabit. And I really like that. It's the notion that we all dwell in this together, and it's our different perspectives, it's recognising them, it's welcoming people, it's listening and learning from others and acknowledging differences that really makes a profound impact on how we see ourselves. Once heard somebody say, you learn a lot about your own country when you travel somewhere else. And so it's that ability to look at what we do from someone else's perspective that allows us to really learn from others, both in terms of our intercultural experiences, but in terms of understanding again where there are those barriers to learning. And in a Scottish Government report that's about initial teacher education, they pick up on the fact that this topic is full of all kinds of different expressions and phrases like anti-racism and decolonisation. But it's important that we think about not just inclusivity in terms of the positive values that inculcates, but also that we think about the actions we have to take to remove discrimination. So many of you will be familiar with the report that we did, the Understanding Racism and Transforming University Cultures report that we did, and that's about taking an anti-racist stance and actually dealing with behaviours that go against the notion and the practice of inclusion. So really challenging, important, complex and profound space that we're occupying here when we talk about inclusivity. So just a few thoughts about what that means for us as an organisation. So May and Bridger talk about inclusive practices and inclusive education necessitating a shift away from supporting specific student groups through a discrete set of policies or time-bound interventions. But really they highlight not only that, but making real cultural and systemic change, which I'll come on to in a second, at the policy and the practice level. Now this is challenging because we become used to particular ways of working, we become used to particular policies and to initiatives that treat different groups in different ways because of their particular needs, but actually inclusivity might mean moving away from that in some respects and having a different way of looking at the organisation, and that's a real challenge. But at the heart of it is quality enhancement, and at the heart of it is inclusion of everybody to fulfil their potential, and that has to be our goal, and that has to be the basis on which we tackle some of the tricky challenges within the organisation and within all of our organisations, individually and collectively. So what does that systemic and cultural change mean? Well, again, in that paper I've just referred to by Thomas and May, they talk about the elements of inclusive learning and teaching. And in this diagram, there are four components to that. There's institutional commitment and management, there's curriculum design, there's curriculum delivery, and there's assessment and feedback, all of which feature in today's event, but all of which are at the heart of our learning and teaching strategy. So what we've signed up to here is really fundamentally thinking about, you know, are we committed at every level to really thinking about what inclusive educational experiences really mean for students and for staff? And whether you are a course convener or whether you are a programme leader or whether you're a head of subject or a head of school or a university manager, a senior manager, every one of us has a part to play in really educating ourselves to understand what this means for us, to understand unconscious bias that we all have, and really understanding all of the cues around the organisation that say this is a place for you or this isn't a place for you. So this is something we really need to think about at every level. And in terms of our strategy, we've made a real commitment, which I'll talk about in a moment or two, to thinking about curriculum design and rethinking how we teach and how we support learning. And I would say that we've got the opportunity for some really rich conversations about what does that actually mean? What is an inclusive curriculum? What does that look like for our students? And how do we work with students in really thinking about their experiences and how we create space, as it talked about in that Advanced HE quote, space for those conversations to take place where we all learn from one another. And assessment and feedback, we've talked a lot in the university about inclusive assessment, and it really does present us with some challenges, particularly in some disciplines where we're very reliant on particular methods of assessment. And I'm really proud of the fact that there is a real desire and commitment to have a discussion about how could assessment look different? How can we make sure that as we rethink the curriculum and we rethink assessment, it's aligned, and it's all aligned around an inclusive agenda? I did say I'd raise lots of questions. So just turning to a government publication in 2017 where they list some initial and they say simple, I have put in inverted commas, simple actions as a starting place. This is a useful point to kind of do a little bit of self-reflection. So the first one of these is housing all teaching materials on the virtual learning environment in such a way that students can access them when they are needed before or after formal teaching. And we have obviously got policies in place and practices to make sure that that happens, but it probably doesn't quite happen with as much advance notice pervasively as we might like. So, you know, a simple step in one sense, but actually embedding this across our practices is not always just as easy as we would like to think. Improving the accessibility of all of our materials. Well, we've done a lot of work within the organisation on this in the last couple of years, particularly prompted by some of the changes in the legislative environment. But again, if you haven't already, I would really encourage you to familiarise yourself, and I have a slide in a moment or two with the links to that, with just what those requirements entail, particularly for video use. And again, a real challenge to us in terms of transcripts and other things like that, but something we're really committed to trying to make much more pervasive and accessible. Ensuring reading lists are focused and up to date, and we have that fabulous library support and service to help us with this. And allowing and facilitating the recording of teaching. And we of course now have an opt-out policy, and we've become very much more accustomed to recording teaching during the last couple of years in particular. But I'm really grateful to Emily Nordman in particular, whose expertise on supporting students to use recorded lectures in learning and to use them effectively really has the potential to make quite a profound impact on students and in support of students. Use of plain English and clear presentation in lectures. That's something that we often need to just check again, because we become accustomed to using particular language that isn't always familiar to all of our students. Terminology that we become very familiar with without even realising that it's not common usage. Pre-selecting diverse learner groups. This is where the list starts to get more challenging, because sometimes students want to work with their friends or people they've worked with before, and it's not always easy to put students into groups and have them working in those groups. We need to support them, we need to teach them and encourage them and enable them to work in groups and to confront some of the challenges that brings to them, but also to develop the really important collaborative skills associated with that. Diversifying the range of learning opportunities, approaches and assessment methods. Come on to again in a moment. Looking at our students as partners, and Mia's going to speak in a minute or two, but I think we have a real commitment to this and we have some initiatives to take that further, but there's always more that we can do. And I think there's a real commitment to working with students as partners, and I'm very comfortable for Mia to challenge us to do that even further than we already do. And the embedding of embedding of inclusive practice in recruitment, promotion, performance development review and other staff focused processes, which isn't the focus of today, but actually is really important in this overall picture around learning and teaching, and that the way we treat our staff and recruitment and the expectations we set will say something about their approach to our approach to students and to student learning. So just on the strategy, before I hand over to Mia, we have 3 pillars to our strategy. I'm really sorry, that's one of my dogs. We have 3 pillars to our strategy: evolving our approach to student-centred active learning, transforming curricular and assessment, and students' professional and skills development. And I'd like to say a little bit about each of them, but before I do, to just share that slide I mentioned, pointing to where we have guidance on how to ensure that we are complying with the digital accessibility guidance, and to make sure that we build our practices drawing on this work, and I'm really grateful to colleagues who've spent a considerable amount of time developing these resources and presenting them in a clear, accessible and helpful way. So the first pillar, and I won't talk through all three, but the first one is about evolving our approach to student-centred active learning. And we've made a commitment both in terms of our physical estate, and on the right-hand side of this image is one of the new spaces in the James McCune-Smith Learning Hub, where in one of those layouts we have up to 300 students who can work in group mode. These are environments we've tried really hard to make sure that they are accessible for students with physical disabilities. So a lot of room to move around that room, lots of height adjustable tables and seats, and the idea that there's not only one place where you can sit, for example, if you're a wheelchair user, but that there are many places that you can use, and you have just as much opportunity in that space as any other student. That was really important to us. But also, what about students with other disabilities, hidden disabilities, for example, where these are noisy, busy spaces? We've tried hard to think about where can they go to create some quieter time, some time to just be still and to escape from the noise and the hubbub that would exist within a room like that, where students are engaging in lots of interaction. But a fantastic opportunity, the more we shape our estate, to think about how we can really create those spaces for dialogue and interaction, where students can learn from each other, where they can challenge us, where we can all bring different knowledges to bear in thinking about the topics that we're studying, and where we can access resources, digital resources during the class, and really bring in different readings, different perspectives, different cultural perspectives on the work that we're doing. So real opportunity there in what we're trying to do around how we teach. And related to that, connecting with real world challenges, seeing the topics that we study from a whole range of perspectives, and really trying to be progressive and have an inclusive curriculum and inclusive approaches to assessing that curriculum. So there's a lot there, and a lot more that I could say about our commitments here, but we've made them, and they matter to all of us who were involved in designing the strategy. And I'm really excited to see what we're going to be able to do through the course of the next couple of years, as we really try to make some substantial progress with the strategy. And at that point, I will hand over to Mia before we return with a couple of practical suggestions about how we can progress. So Mia.
So Moira kind of touched on it already, but we're really, really lucky at the SRC to have a really good partnership with the university. I don't know if there are any externals here today, but one thing from speaking to other education officers from around Scotland and the UK is that our relationship is quite unique. One thing that I was quite taken aback by when I initially ran for the position. So if people aren't familiar with how you run positions, they're elected by the student population. I had a chat with current SRC officers, people from outside of the student politics bubble, and asked them, what do you think is the main issue that's facing education? And they all said, inclusive education. And then when I came into the role, I found out the university was already doing so much work on it, which I think has been my takeaway from this year in office. I've been in the post since July. It's the post is that so much of what the student population think is actually also mirrored. I think we have a lot in common, more in common than people would initially realise about what we'd like to see in terms of changes to education and also how we go about that. So the work that I've done this year in the SRC, and there's my reps to the right, some of them, some of my school reps and college conveners, is really trying to empower my reps to focus on inclusive education. So the first thing that we drew up and decided to do was we wrote an inclusive education charter. So it was just a short document just outlining the different things that could be changed in education at the University of Glasgow, thinking about hidden disabilities, mental health issues, neurodivergent students, and then also things like student carers, student parents, outside the mould of what you would call the traditional student, which we don't really believe in anyway at the SLC, but I think the view of the traditional student is we're moving away from it at the university. So how did we implement that charter? What we decided to do was to implement our pyramid. So in terms of the pyramid of student representation, I'm at the top of it, and then I've got my college conveners, my school reps, and what I really wanted to empower my college conveners and school reps to do is to take this charter into their learning and teaching committees at their individual schools, show it to their class reps, and some of the outcomes that we've had from this have been amazing. I know if there's any colleagues here from the School of Geographical and Earth Sciences, the school rep there, Elizabeth, has done some really great work in implementing staff and student town halls, working on things in her SSLCs. So it really was dependent on the school and what the reps thought would be the best fit for their own area of learning. Because like I said, I think there is a really good student-staff partnership here, and it's really been taken on board by the staff, which was amazing to see. This kind of all feeds into decolonising the curriculum movement across the university. This is something that students are really passionate about, but they don't really know the best way that it could be implemented, I think for fear of making mistakes or doing things the wrong way. And from speaking to staff, that's something that I've also seen mirrored in the views of staff about how important it is to have an anti-racist curriculum, but how do we go about that in the right way? Next slide, please. Thank you. So I went to the JMS. I spoke to students that I kind of embarrassed myself by trying to speak to loads of different people. And I asked them, what do you think about an anti-racist curriculum, decolonising the curriculum? Everybody said to me, I think I spoke to around 100 students on that day, oh, it's really important and we really want to see this in university. A few of them at first didn't know what I meant when I explained it to them. They're like, oh yeah, of course, that's really important. But the main thing that came out of those conversations was two things. It was tokenism and also a lack of common understanding of what it would mean in practice. So by tokenism, students were concerned that it would be used kind of as wash across a curriculum of saying we're being really inclusive and we've introduced what call it on the reading list. That was one thing that students were really concerned about. In terms of inclusive education, they really wanted to see it embedded in their curriculum, embedded in teaching. And a few students gave me really good examples from across the 4 colleges of ways that different members of staff have done this. The second point of a lack of common understanding was students had different ideas about what that might mean. When I brought up the idea of hidden disabilities, they were like, I'd never considered that. Obviously, they all really care about it, but there were elements that they had never considered before. And that's something that I've seen mirrored in the staff as well, of everyone really cares here about making a difference, but how do we go about that in the best way? How do we go about that in a way that can embed into the curriculum? And I think that day in the JMS really showed me that we all are on the same page here. It's something that we all really care about. And I think from our perspective here at the SRC, what we'd like to see in education at the university is an education for our students that prepares them for the world, prepares them for all the different people that you'll meet, all the different countries that you might go and visit, all the different people in society with different views, and really have a well-rounded education that prepares you for life and gives you the best start in your career. Next slide, please. So when I future of inclusive education might mean, they all have different things to say, depending on their subject, but it all goes back to that main point of I want to be ready for all the different people that I might meet, all the different scenarios that I might find myself in because of my hopefully get me into a career or a position I want to be in, and I want to be able to do that to the best of my ability. And I think that's why we are so passionate about inclusive education, because not only does it help students learn in terms of day-to-day, dependent on their specific needs, but it also prepares them for whatever might come for them after university. So it's a really exciting topic. It's something that so many students are passionate about. And I think as well, it's really dependent on your individual academic area. Just from speaking to students in MVLS, like this year, I've worked with them on producing anti-racist materials for medical students, which is so different from the world of an art student learning about, for example, the history of art in America in the 18th century. It's so different. And that's what makes it so exciting. So thank you. That's my little slot over. Pass back to Moira.
Thanks, Mia. I just wanted to finish with some specific initiatives that are happening at the moment, but also, you know, to just acknowledge that we are not starting from scratch here. These are just a few of the initiatives, and what we're talking about in terms of the commitment to inclusivity is built on a number of years of work that has happened across the university building up to this. So I do want to acknowledge that we have colleagues who, for example, if I think about the work that Elliot Spaeth has been doing around inclusivity with staff workshops, that Professor Frank Coulton has done around his role as disability champion, and workshops on hidden disabilities. There are so many things that are providing a really firm basis for us in the university, but here are some specific initiatives. We have just launched schemes to fund up to 60 student staff partnerships. If you're not already familiar with this, then if you have a look on our Learning Teaching Development Fund SharePoint site, you'll see that there are a number of schemes. So there's the Learning Teaching Development Fund itself, which has got a number of projects that we're looking to fund, and they are linked to the values and the strategy, of which inclusivity is one. Plus, all of the staff-student partnerships have to demonstrate how they connect to those values, and several are specifically related to decolonising the curriculum. There are a number of commitments that we've outlined in the Understanding Racism, Transforming University Cultures Action Plan. I'm sure many University of Glasgow colleagues will be familiar with that, but if you're one of our external guests, then you can find both the report that we did and the action plan at the link that's provided there. If you don't already know, and if you're interested, we have a Decolonising the Curriculum Community of Practice, which has been launched in the last few months, and which is really looking to initiate and take forward a number of projects and ideas that can make a difference, but that are not necessarily progressed through the more formal learning and teaching channels within the university and the formal committees. We have this conference today, which was the theme that we picked last year as a commitment to this aspect of the learning and teaching strategy, but it's hopefully one of many initiatives and activities that we will have where we can really talk about inclusivity in the depth and with our personal and collective challenge that we've been speaking about today, and really make those meaningful changes that we're all signed up to doing and that we all believe are the right things to do. We're currently shortlisting, I believe, for appointments that will support curriculum redesign to progress the inclusive curriculum objectives that we've already been outlining. And we have, of course, the ongoing assessment and feedback transformation programme, where we are embedding that work based on the accessible and inclusive learning policy. So a number of things that we are progressing and that are really central to everything that we've talked about today. So if you don't already know about these, very happy to kind of fill you in, look out for me or for Mia or for the Deans of Learning and Teaching during the course of the conference, and we can tell you a little bit more about those, and do please get involved. So they are not the totality of what we'll do, but they're a part of that. So thank you very much for listening. Hopefully you have found this helpful and enabling in terms of each of us being able to do something to progress inclusivity within the context of learning and teaching. Thank you. And my mouse won't let me click on the stop share button. There we go. Very happy to take any questions or comments. Okay.
Both.
Sarah, are we okay for time? Let's take a couple of these questions.
Yes, we have 5 minutes. My camera isn't turning on, but I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Right, okay. So Mia, Lynn is asking if you can share some of the best practice examples that you heard about. I will pick this up with you and we will make sure that we get these shared very, very widely. I think really the one I want to pick, can you see the question from Jason Miles Campbell? Any thoughts on balancing meeting the diverse needs of learners for each learner with keeping a community and commonality of learning for peer support, social aspects of learning, etc.? Fantastic question, Jason.
Thanks for picking that one, Sarah. Nice, easy question to start with. I could ask me if she wants to have a go at that one, but I won't wimp out. So it is a great question. I think it's the aspiration that we want for every student, is to be able to find their own way through learning and teaching and assessment. but really challenging when we have to have consistency of practice and approach and things like that. But I think there are people in the room who are better expert to answer this question, and I think it's one that we need to try and all work on together. But certainly, I think one aspect of it is including choice. We don't always offer choice around assessment methods where we could, for example. Flexibility and approaches to learning. I think we've discovered quite a lot during the pandemic that, we talked about recorded lectures, and we have an opt-out policy, and it's not something we're going to require colleagues to do, and not every session can be recorded. It's not always appropriate, but I think these sorts of things make a difference in terms of enabling students with caring responsibilities, or students who are studying in English as a second language, to be able to access a recording and use that usefully in their learning. So I think there are some aspects that were highlighted in one of those slides that make a difference to all students. And there have been some interesting, I know on the postgraduate certificate in academic practice, the PGCAP, there's a course on inclusivity in that. So there are already some approaches that people are being exposed to there that can introduce inclusivity in a way that allows all students to flourish. And I kind of wish I could invite Elliot to the stage to help me answer this question. And I think the other thing that's interesting there is a number of those courses allow people to introduce their own learning outcomes within a broad framework of learning outcomes. So there are practices like that can make a difference, I think. But we just sometimes, I think we also need to try different approaches within some of our courses, different approaches to assessment, where there is that element of choice. I mean, I've taken courses myself where there are 4 or 5 different ways to assess a particular set of learning outcomes, and that element of choice doesn't compromise academic standards. It allows flexibility. So there are areas there that I think we can pursue more fully, Jason, but I think your question is far better than the answer that I have given you, and it's something that I would really, if I could see them, like to encourage other people to answer, because they are better equipped to do so in some of these areas than I am. Mia, I don't know whether there is anything that you would want to add to that.
I think the thing that came to mind for me, I'm just gonna, so I can read the question. Oh, it's gone. When I saw individual learners and also community, I thought of was when you accommodate for an individual learner, you are feel like they're part of a community. I think that's a really important part of it. Working to make sure that every learner in the class is accommodated for is going to make them feel more welcome and create more of a group ethos. I think sometimes people are worried, and I know I've worried about this myself, about accidentally ostracizing people if you're making accommodations for them, but it really is the opposite. So that's my takeaway, I guess, from that question.
And I think I would say that such a lot of this requires an awful lot of different expertise to answer these questions, and a lot of understanding of students and of colleagues and their own needs. So, my comment about if there are experts in the room, there are, and that's where we all need to work together on these. These are complicated questions which require a range of inputs to them, particularly around topics like Mia has said around the anti-racist curriculum. We've got to open up these discussions and have a lot of voices and a lot of solutions, but that in itself creates a sense of community.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. There's a couple of questions about how people can access the Decolonising Curriculum Community of Practice, which I will pick up with delegates afterwards and make sure everybody's aware of this. I'm looking at time. I'm aware that we really need to be heading into the first presentations now. So I just want to say a huge thank you to both of you. That was a fantastic talk. I can see the claps coming up the side of the screen now. So thank you both, and I will see all of you very soon. And I'm going to head into the first presentations now.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.